No matter what you're going through, the only two things you ever have in life are your relationships and your reputation. It is sometimes easier to get yourself out of certain situations if you sacrifice a relationship or you sacrifice your reputation. It's a heavy piece of advice, but just trust me when I tell you that they're hard to come back from.
Welcome to the Secrets to Abundant Living podcast. Your guide on this journey is Amy Silvas. If you're ready for the secrets to an abundant life, hit that subscribe button now, and let's get started.
Secrets to Abundant Living podcast community. This is your host, Amy Silvas. I am delighted to welcome our fantastic guest today. His name is Chad Sutton, and I always do a poor job of giving a little bit of context. So I'm going to let Chad say hello and then give some context about who he is and our relationship. Welcome, Chad.
Yeah, hello. Happy to be here. It's so proud of this podcast that I've watched you launch, and it's just been incredible. So, yeah, I'm Chad, welcome. Good to see you guys. Amy and I have been friends / I guess brother and sister for a long time. You'll notice through the episode, we poke at each other like brother and sister sometimes. Yes. If we're not making fun of each other, are we really growing,
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just wanted to give some context. You're going to talk a little bit about yourself, but for those who don't know, I met Chad about 5 years ago, if you can believe that.
Been that long?
I know.
Like that, yeah.
Just crazy. I think it was February.
All right, let me say that again. Is that all?
We've been through a bit, and that may come up here on the episode too. But yeah, we started off as business partners, and Chad really and his business partners helped me get my real estate career off the ground. But more importantly, as I've gotten to know him, the amount of respect I have for not only his story, but how he operates as a person, not just in a business and personal context when things are great, but most importantly, when things get bumpy, because that's just part of life, right? So I'm not going to blow Chad's head up too big because God knows he needs to get it through a door for what he's done with the podcast. But I do have tremendous respect for him. So I'm just really honored that you've taken the time to join us. And yeah, please tell us a little bit about yourself, Chad.
Yeah, and don't worry, folks, if my head gets too big, Amy will pop it with a fine point needle. She's thinking that. As Amy mentioned, we've done numerous real estate deals together. Been in real estate for, a lot of years now, in some shape or form. I've actually come from a third generation real estate family. I actually worked on them as a child and didn't really know that we owned them. I just knew that, granddad had a construction company or something. I didn't know anything else. Fun fact for you, parents and grandparents out there, if your child gets in trouble, like for underage drinking or something and needs to pay off bills, working on rental houses is a great way to do it. That's what I got to do. But yeah, I'm a recovering engineer. I went through the corporate ladder route. I played with Legos and Connects as a kid, and some people said, hey, you should be an engineer. And I listened. And it was great. And I designed cool things that go boom, like, aircraft engines and rockets, and worked on the space shuttle and all that really cool stuff. And, 3 patents and 4 programs in, I realized, the responsibility gets bigger, the time gets shorter, and the resources get smaller every time I do this. And I started to realize that notion of, gosh, I'm trading all this time for money and I'm not really getting any richer at it, making a lot of other people rich, but not myself. And I think it was the final straw on that was when I got my 3rd patent in combustion technology for General Electric, and I got about $300 and a smack on the rear that said, attaboy. I was like, okay, wait a minute. I just generated like $1 billion technology for you, which granted, I know, like I wouldn't have done it had they not been giving me all these resources to work on, but still it's like, okay, you start to realize the value of one's brain. And that eventually led to getting involved in the family business a little bit. So we did have some real estate. Granddad got sick, passed away, huge influence in my life. We can totally unpack that, and learned a lot from him. But getting involved with that, started to realize, wow, there's something to this owning property thing. And it's also around the time I was just asking questions about, how does one create wealth in this country? Well, you go read all these books, and guess what? Real estate's a pretty good common denominator. Unless you want to be like Elon Musk and go design a Tesla or, like change the world, which I didn't, really want to do. So, that's kind of the short version of it. I had a really interesting career path that kind of taught me what I didn't want to do ultimately. And we can unpack this if you want, Amy, but really it's, for me to win, others had to lose. And I didn't like that. I like a more of a triple bottom line. When I win, everybody wins. And that's what I get in real estate. And so Proud to be one of the 5 managing partners of Quattro Capital. We are an owner operator of real estate in 6 states. We have survived. Some of us have survived the Great Recession, and all of us have now survived the whatever we're going to call this time, which has been interesting. And as Amy mentioned, it's not all roses and sunshine in real estate, and I can tell you that too. But yeah, let me start there and see where you want to go with it. I can talk for days, as you know.
I love it. Yeah, lots to unpack there, as you said, and great kind of breadcrumbs for us to follow. But to level set, and Chad, I know you know this, and for our audience, thank God we're growing. So I want to bring everyone into the fold that at the podcast, we believe that money is not the destination. The destination is to live how we want, do what we want, where we want, when we want, with whom we want, for however long we want. And this hands-off income, whether it's real estate like you and I have chosen, or the confluence of other vehicles that are out there, we like to, help people understand how they don't have to trade their time for money, not as a destination, but as just that vehicle to live life on their terms. So you and I have talked to a lot of investors. We talked to high net worth folks that believed and were taught, make more money, climb the corporate ladder. And for some, that may not be kind of the lifestyle that they wanted. So how do you define abundance in your life now? We'll talk about how you used to, or if that's changed, but what does that mean to you now as a father, husband, however you want to frame it?
Yeah, gosh, I didn't even mention that. I am married to a wonderful woman with 2 beautiful children whom I love dearly. So that is very important to me.
Yeah.
Abundance is it's the opposite of scarcity. I'm going to cop out on that, right? But it is the opposite of feeling like there's not enough, right? And so you start to think about that from different aspects of life. I talk about different freedoms in life, and we've all heard financial freedom. That leads to geographical freedom. That leads to freedom of time and freedom of relationship and passion. And when you have all of those things and you have that freedom, you start to understand, well, this is the feeling of abundance. I don't have to spend my time here. I don't have to spend my money here. I don't have to be here. I don't have to spend time with you if I don't want to, right? I mean, it's this thing that and I'm here, by the way. But it's that whole notion that there's just more than enough, right? And it is interesting that we feel like that is a destination, but that is not a destination. It's a frame of mind.
Fascinating. Yeah, I love that. That is not a destination, but a frame of mind. So how do you cultivate that in your life? I know we don't have hours to talk about it, but I'd love to know, just maybe to give a couple examples of how you bring that into fruition in your life today.
I'm thinking back to how I used to think about this. It really took a bit of a paradigm shift, right? And that, and you read this book, The Go-Giver, which I know you love, and many others. It is, if you want something, you have to give it, right? And so if you want time, give of your time. If you want money, give of your money. And you start to attract things back to you in the reciprocal sense, right? And so it's like what I love about the Go-Giver book that you and I have talked about a lot. I think you actually sent me my copy of that, and I've now paid it forward to someone else.
Awesome.
But you think about the law of value. That is law number 1 of the 5 laws. And it literally says your value is perceived by how much more you give to others than what you expect to receive in return or in compensation, right? Yeah. And so when you start to see the world that way, you start to think, well, I've got so much I can give. I can give of my time. I can give of my talents. I can give of my money, my treasures, or time, talents, treasures, right? And when you start to do that, you start to, there's a lot of gratifying feeling that comes from that, from just the feeling of helping another human being, but also you've now spawned something in that human being. And when you spawn something in that human being, they're going to have this reciprocity gene to either give something back to you or pay it forward and give something to someone else. And when you start to realize, like, do that 50 times in your circle, and you start to realize it all comes back to you and it goes to their circle of friends, right? And so it's this ripple effect of positivity and of just abundance, where we're giving more than we expect to receive in return. And guess what? When others do that too, you wind up getting as much as you're giving. It's a paradigm shift. I'm not going to lie.
It really is. It really is. And Chad, what I love about this, because I know you so well, is that you live this. This isn't just something that's really easy to come on a podcast and just say, I've seen it in our business. together, and obviously been a benefactor personally from you and your team as well. I think about how hard it is to cultivate abundance for others as a go-giver when times are tough, right? Because, and we can be open kimono here with folks. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates at the highest level, the fastest amount of time over the past couple of years, and it made real estate a little bit more tough. Have we been okay? Yes. Has it been a little bumpy? For sure. But I think about, we get on property management calls. We look at how to care for residents, even when things are a little lean or may not be in the best situation possible. And your ability to still be a go-giver, still feel like your cup is overflowing so much that you have something to give. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. I didn't prepare you for this, but can you think of an example of maybe as opposed to being a W-2 worker, but now as an investor and entrepreneur, you were able to show abundance to somebody else, whether a vendor or a resident or, just anyone in our space? Would love to hear a story if you're willing to share.
Oh, 100%. And it is harder to do this when times are tough, right? It's easy when you got money pouring out of your ears and
Yes.
you're running off on vacations all the time because you just don't have to work because you've done so well. I mean, if you're in that mode, great. I love it. That's the good times. Enjoy it.
Yes.
But when the times are not so great, and kind of what Amy just mentioned, I mean, we have felt a ripple effect of economic tightening, right? The Federal Reserve literally put the economy in a headlock, started giving it a noogie, trying to make it slow down. And so, we have felt things got more expensive. That was pre-interest rate hikes, right? We have felt the when interest rates go up and the Fed starts pushing money also off their balance sheet. There's kind of two pedals they were double clutching there. That causes money to be scarce, and that means everything you do in business becomes harder and scarce. And so, think about when we're in that situation and a natural disaster happens, right? I'm going to pick on Helene because it just happened. And although we have done this for prior hurricanes, but although this hasn't happened yet, I see it happening as we did have one building, fortunately, only 1 out of 17. I mean, let's look at the positivity of that. We have 17 assets, only 1 sustained damage, and no buildings are down. Mm-hmm. But, Augusta, Georgia, unfortunately was out of power for like a week. Some places didn't have water. So naturally, people in the service industry probably weren't going to work, right? And so what we can do as owners in our right is we can throw the book at them and say, well, sorry, you can't pay your rent. You got to get out. Or we hopefully have run our business solvently enough that we can not forgive that rent, but probably delay, work with them, help them catch up. And if it makes sense, sometimes the write-offs do need to happen. You do need to forgive some of it. But that's an example of how you can really, you're well within your right in the business to kick somebody when they're down and go put a new tenant in. But is it the right thing to do? Is that going to send the right message to the community? How is that going to be perceived by others? Well, it's going to be negative, right? That is there is only a finite amount of time and money. And, I have to get new tenants in here to start building that rent back up, and I've got to get the non-paying residents out. That's a very scarce mindset of it.
Right.
And sometimes you have to operate that way. But in this case, people deserve a little bit of grace. It's like they didn't predict this. I mean, they probably were great paying tenants beforehand. And so, we try to, that's an example of how thinking of it in more of the long game and okay, how does the community deserve to be treated in this situation rather than what's right for the numbers,
I love that. Well, yeah. And the, I don't know if in your W-2, because I didn't have, the type of role that you did, but I don't know if you had the ability, whether from just kind of where you ranked in the company or just from a scale perspective to make a difference in people's lives, maybe at the scale that you're able to now. But right now you have that agency to make that call with this property, or I know there are several other examples that come to mind where I've seen you do that as well. To just treat people right, to do the right thing.
Yeah, in the W-2 world, when I left, I was a global commodity leader. So I did have quite a bit of influence and power, but I left honestly during COVID. And so think about, and yes, I did I had 2 things going at one time. I was in real estate and W-2 at one point. But Think about in COVID, right? I was a global supply chain leader, basically. I owned a global commodity that was heavy electrical components for like wind turbines and hydropower plants, things like that. Well, I still had to require my vendors to ship parts, even though their factories were closed down. I still had to hold them to the contract and say, well, sorry, you're not shipping parts. You now have to pay these day-for-day penalties. Now, granted, if you're the legal guys out there are like, hey, and they're like force majeure clauses for that. Yes, and some of them pulled it, and some of them said, the hell with you, I'm not doing that. But I didn't have the ability, when I was, of course, working for a multinational conglomerate to make widespread, we'll just say, acts of good faith,
Right.
without approval of others.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. So was there a certain point? I mean, you mentioned working with your grandpa and the influence he's had on you. One thing we didn't mention is Quattro Capital is a bit of a family business, right? You work with your aunts, you work with your mom. You mentioned kind of you're the third generation of, and referencing your grandpa. Was there at some point where you felt maybe a shift in how you defined abundance or how you want to show up in this world, in this go-giver mindset, that changed? Or have you kind of always had this mentality of wanting that, triple kind of benefit or bottom line in your professional life?
No, it's not always been. The shift probably happened later in my W-2 career. And it was, around the time where I was realizing, wait a minute, okay, I now understand abundance of time. I mean, we always seem to understand abundance of money. I started to understand abundance of time and like, okay, wait a minute. I'm giving all of it away right now for this fixed return, if you will. And then I started to understand abundance of geography, right? Which I didn't really have. I was supposed to go to a cubicle, and then my wife got a residency somewhere else, and I followed her, and I was like, oh, wait, I can work remotely? What is this? Now they don't know where I'm at now. I can work wherever. I can be in Seattle for all they know, right?
Yes.
So I start to understand all this stuff. And it wasn't really something that was instilled in me as a kid. As a kid, it was, look, you've got to go to school, get a good job, get a good degree, all this kind of stuff, and work really, really hard to be the best at what you do and the hell with everybody else. And then you get that top position, and that's success, right? And honestly, I think where it started to shift was that same grandfather. He went from working in the oil fields to playing and then coaching collegiate football, and then he became a national executive for an insurance company. And so I watched him like, okay, this is what happens when you work really, really hard. And by the end of his career, he was making like, back in the 90s, like $500,000 a year, which is, pretty decent salary at that time. Right? It's I'd say it's probably 2x that now.
Yeah.
But what I saw happen was, okay, he kept climbing that ladder, and the target on his back got bigger and bigger, and he pissed off the wrong person. Someone put an arrow in his back, and he fell off the ladder. And so what I learned from that was that trying to be the best at something and working really, really hard, that's not enough, right? You have to be in charge of your own destiny, in charge of your own income streams, have that control, because the further, like a W-2 job is a W-2 job is a W-2 job. If you're a CEO of General Electric, you can still be fired tomorrow, right there. And by the way, the target on your back is about yay big. It's a lot. I'm showing the whole screen if you're not watching.
Yeah.
And so that's where it really started to shift. And like, I was like, okay, everything I thought I knew is wrong, because he just got canceled, I guess is the right, term at the time. And so I learned a lot from that. I learned a tremendous amount, not only from him, but also from watching him and from watching how the world, treated him when that changed. And so that was kind of the shift in my where I placed my trust.
Mm.
And then from there, as I started going through these different phases of my career and realizing, wait a minute, okay, this isn't how I get abundance of time. This isn't how I get abundance of geography. I start to think about things different. And that just led down this whole road that has got me here today.
That's tremendous. Wow. How, I've heard you talk about how much you admire your grandpa and how much of an influence he's had on you. I hadn't heard kind of this other side of, just watching and seeing that play out and thinking, gosh, is this what I want for me? Is this inevitable maybe? Or is there another way to kind of go about that? And as you were talking about what you've learned throughout your career and all of that, I think it's worth mentioning for folks who don't know. How old are you, Chad?
I am 36.
Okay. Yeah. So although we talk about meeting Chad, him getting into this real estate business, he was in his very early 30s, if not just 30. So
Yeah.
how I'm really just kind of standing back, from my big sister point of view, just how great it is to hear how much you've learned and experienced, not just from witnessing others, but just, through your exciting career in your W-2 and now in real estate. There's just so many powerful lessons that it sounds like you've learned and applied very quickly. And I know there's a whole slew of those in the real estate game that I'm sure you could talk about.
Oh, yeah.
Well, so given kind of where you entered as in real estate, what you were looking for, what you've experienced, what are you interested in cultivating in terms of more abundance in your life right now? Because I'm sure not everything's perfect, right? All of us don't hit every single abundance bell, all the time. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, no, and we're always growing, right? And so, you said something a minute ago, like, yes, there's been a lot of things that I've been able to learn, and I'm so grateful to have learned them at a relatively young age. I mean,
Yes.
in my mind, I've been at this a long time. I've had a full career before this, right?
Yeah.
Two, actually. I was an engineer and then got into executive level stuff and then became real estate. So it's like, in my mind, I've lived 3 lifetimes. Most people are like, dude, shut up. You're not 40 yet, right? But, so I can't wait to see what 40 is like. But, it's a journey. It's not a destination. I can't say that enough. And in that, yes, things are drastically different than they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago, right? And one of my coaches made me write I had to do an exercise where I literally had to go write down things that were true 10 years ago to the day. And it was really fun to do given how much change there's been in my life. Like, I was newly married. I did not have the 2 kids. I didn't even have the dog that I have, right? And, I was working a totally different corporate career, and it was like you had to write down things you were worried about at the time. And it was like, I remember Courtney's, something on her car went out. And I was like, gosh, how are we going to afford to fix this $3,000 thing? So it was like different things you're worried about at the time. And then I had to write a letter to my future self 10 years in the future, because now I've got a very clear vision on where I'm going and all that. So very cool exercise, sidebar, if y'all want to do that.
Yes.
But the reason I say it's not a destination, it's a journey is, I can look back on things that I've experienced and things that I've been forced to go through and crises I've dealt with. And it's like, I'm so grateful for those because they've grown me incrementally. But even what we've built today, as you know, I'm very active in the company, right? Like I have not replaced myself. And so while it's fun to talk about this notion of passive income and not trading time for money, well, it's not exactly binary like that, right? Like even if you're a passive investor, as in investing in LP shares, not operating the deal, you're still going to put some time into managing your portfolio, vetting investments to go into, things like that. It just means that you're putting like more upfront time and back end time on it rather than, okay, like I have to turn the crank to get $1, turn the crank, get $1, turn the crank, get $1. You're at least transitioning to buying little machines that you can kind of set up and like, okay, I got it working and I studied it and I understand the operations manual and now I can push go and then I'll come back and check on it in 30 days and make sure it's still going, right? So it's a different kind of like less active income,
Yes.
But gosh, to come back to the question and then stop rambling. Yes, it is more of a journey in that I look forward to creating more abundance of time. I'm good at that now. I could be better. I'm looking at creating more abundance of money. Granted, we have gone through, we created a lot of it, then we went through a crisis and had to put a lot of it back in. And so it's like, I'm ready to not have to do that as much, but that just comes from better preparation, right? Controlling the controllables. I do look forward one day, and this is like, you go through phases of life. Right now, my geographical freedom is there, but it is limited by, okay, my kids are in school, my wife has a career, and so I don't just get up and go to Europe tomorrow because I feel like it. One day that will be a thing. So there's things that you want to move toward, but you also have to recognize that you're in a phase of life, you're in a season of life, and that thing may need to be part of the next season plan, for example. So yeah, I think, and the final thing, one thing I've really been expanding lately is the abundance of generosity. And that's not just giving of money, that's giving of talents. That's, so I'm mentoring some people. That's giving some other young men who are like, 10 years younger. I'm involved with a lot of foster and adoption ministry here in town now, just because that, like vulnerable children kind of have a place in my heart.
Yes.
And so that, like, just trying to create more of that. And I'm telling you, you want perspective when you give in those ways. For example, on the mentoring, not only do I pour into someone else who can learn from things that I've learned earlier, it also reminds me where I was. And it's a reminder with every conversation of, man, I remember when I used to think like that, and so it's cool to see how far you've come.
Amazing. When I first started this podcast, Chad told me, reminded me to sometimes grab the mic back. So I'm going to grab the mic back to follow my mentors. I've been on Chad's podcast a few times. We've had a lot of fun, but I really get goosebumps, Chad, when you said, well, everything that you've said, but when you mentioned, not being grateful for the trials and tribulations, and what you learned, because what I've seen really up close with you, your family, Quattro Capital in general is, gosh, there are so many opportunities just in business, right? It's just the nature of being an entrepreneur and an investor to be really frustrated with things that are outside of your control. It's not fair. Right. You and I go, put on our tinfoil hats. We talk about the Federal Reserve, how wild is it? But, there's a unelected authority that controls our money supply, blah, blah, blah. And it impacts us, but we have a choice, right? We have a choice. There's always something in our control. We could focus on what isn't in our control, what's not fair. Maybe a whole host of events comically came together and made life a little bit more difficult or business a little more difficult. But gosh, this mindset that you have of, all right, well, what is within our control? What's my next best step? There's nothing wrong with getting in our feelings and being upset about something. But gosh, if you dwell there for too long, you're really only hurting yourself. So,
yeah.
And then gosh, yeah, really that perspective. And, I don't mind talking on this podcast. I don't think you are either. You and I are both Christians, and the fact that God designed us to be happiest when we're helping and giving to others. And part of it, I believe, is that perspective, as you said, when you're helping people in need, there's nothing quicker that takes your focus off yourself and your woes, right? Than to really pour into others. And what a great way to live life, especially with, some of the most vulnerable members of society with children in the foster system. So I didn't know you were involved in that. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's relatively new. So we may not have talked about it the last year. But I mean, look, God gave us mountains so we can learn how to climb, right? There's a song about that, Lone Star. Go check it out.
Yes.
Old country song. But yeah, that's totally the thing. And one of my favorite strengths that I write this down so that I remember it all the time. It's something you just mentioned is like, look, control the controllables. Anything you can control, just control it.
Yeah.
And then the uncontrollables, it's like playing Monopoly. You just have to know what the rules of the game are, right? Sometimes the rules change, and you just have to okay, the presidential election coming up. Yeah, is that going to end any of us either way? No. Right. But the rules might change a little bit. And so you need to learn how to play by the new rules. Yeah. And so that's kind of the thing. And like the only thing I'll leave you with on this topic, and I know you want to go to some other stuff, is like, I always ask myself when things aren't going my way, or when I got a problem, it just doesn't have a solution the way I'm looking at it, right? What if the things I knew to be true about this problem suddenly weren't true, right? And if you start thinking about problems in that regard, like for example, I'm working a problem now where we do have one project where, gosh, we just didn't hit the rent plan. The market changed.
Yeah.
The loan is too big for the property, and we need to refinance it. We're running out of time. And it's like, well, when you look at all the conventional ways to look at this, no, it doesn't. Like, there's not a solution without bringing extra money to the table. But you start to poke on things like, I wonder if, like, property taxes are usually pretty certain, right? Well, what if I told you I figured out a way to get them forgiven on this one project in a certain situation? It's like you just start to ask yourself, what if what I knew to be true suddenly wasn't? And you just keep kind of poking on, like, think about poking on bricks at a brick wall. You poke on them, poke on them, poke on them. Eventually one presses in. You're like, oh, I didn't know that would do that. And then the door opens, that kind of thing.
I love that. I've seen you implement that countless times. That's a brilliant piece of wisdom. I want to just drop some more wisdom on folks. You talk about where you were 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. I get feedback from folks that are going through some, tough times that listen to this podcast, that gain inspiration, that gain encouragement, regardless of where they are in their life. And I always love to end with the last question of, for our listeners who are interested in creating more abundance in their life, regardless, financial, spiritual health, whatever that is. Do you have a piece of, you've already given such great advice, but do you have a last piece of advice that you would give if you were speaking to someone looking for that?
No matter what you're going through, no matter what the tribulation, no matter what the problem that you're solving, the only two things you ever have in life are your relationships and your reputation. And so it is sometimes easier to get yourself out of certain situations if you sacrifice a relationship or you sacrifice something that might ding your reputation. For example, maybe doing what's right for you, but not what's right for others in the project. It's a heavy piece of advice, but just trust me when I tell you that I have seen both myself make these mistakes and I've seen others make these mistakes, and they're hard to come back from, right? But if you just always remember that your primary two things in this world that you have to your name are your reputation, what others think of you, and your relationships. And if you stick to those, usually you're going to do all right.
Mic drop. Boom. I knew you'd deliver, Chad. Very, very cool. Thank you so much for joining today. This is really special, especially, coming up in real estate, being your business partner, you being a mentor to me, being on your podcast several times. It's just real special to have you, Chad. And I admire you tremendously. Thank you so much for joining us today. How can folks get a hold of you? Because I have a feeling we're going to have a bunch of people that are going to be like, I need some Chad in my life. So how can people reach out to you?
Yeah, the best way to find me is at our website. So you can Google Chad Sutton Quattro Capital, or you can just go to thequattroway.com, and that's spelled Quattro, like the Audi Quattro. Yes, we are the Audi of real estate if you like luxury cars. But yeah, check us out, thequattroway.com. You can book a time with me. Love to talk with you. And I get encouraged from people reaching out when I have a podcast. So I'd love to pour into you and continue the conversation.
Love it. We'll put those in the show notes for sure. Chad, you're awesome. Thank you for being you. Everyone, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Secrets to Abundant Living podcast. Make sure to share this episode with someone who can benefit from Chad's wisdom. Gosh, I know that I have. So let's make sure to share the love. And we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks again.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Secrets to Abundant Living podcast. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights that will empower you on your journey towards abundance. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback means the world to us, and it helps others discover the secrets to an abundant life too. Stay connected with us on LinkedIn, Amy Silvis. Keep striving for your goals, nurturing your relationships, and embracing the adventure that is life. Until next time, we wish you an abundantly fulfilling day.